you so much, Adeniki, and thank you for your kind words. So it's a joy to be on the advisory board of the Green Institute, and it's an honor to be one of the chairs or co-chairs of this conference, and it's a very exciting day. So I guess without further ado, I just have a little slide set. I don't want to take too long because I'm quite excited to hear what David Hanna has to say on water, but let me just do a little overview. So I hope you can see that okay. So I'm a professor in University College Dublin, but I am on secondment to what's called the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network with responsibility for the SDG Academy. The SDSN, SDSN was set up under Professor Jeffrey Sachs when he was a senior advisor to Ban Ki-moon, particularly coming out of Rio +20. There was 3 years of work programs, non-governmental and governmental, but SDSN provided the more academic and legal oversight, and they helped the Secretary General with a synthesis report in November 2014, which went into the intergovernmental negotiations co-facilitated or chaired by the ambassador from Ireland and from Kenya, Donoghue and Kamau. Since since the signing, obviously, of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in 2015 and the Paris Agreement that followed later in December, SDSN is more like a think tank that reports into Amina Mohammed. She used to be one of the co-chairs of SDSN, but now she's Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations with responsibility for sustainable development. And we're more like a think tank that mobilizes academics and thought leaders, mobilizing partnerships through government and corporates and civil society to implement the SDGs and Paris Agreement and the Biodiversity Coming Montreal Agreement at all levels of governance, meaning global, regional, national, and local. Just to say, like, who are we? We have about 1,900 members and about 65 country chapters. You might know us from the policy analysis like the Happiness Report, and we also do the ranking of countries through the SDG dashboard. So we kind of monitor countries, how they're doing and the progress of all 169 targets or 234 indicators for the SDGs. My responsibility, we have offices in New York, Paris, and Kuala Lumpur. The Secretariat does, and I have responsibility for the SDG Academy. So traditionally, the Academy, it's 50 courses on a lot of platforms, but the most used is edX. Just because you have free online courses doesn't mean they're used. So we spend a lot of our time now mobilizing them into university degrees or into the HR runs of corporates or governments. And we also set up communities of practice. Probably the most well-known is Mission 4.7 with the Ban Ki-moon Center and UNESCO and the Pontifical Academy of Science and Social Science. We also have one with UNESCO on implementing the OER recommendation. And there is a third World OER Conference in Dubai, November 19th and 20th, that everyone can go to and register for free if you're in that region. And we are taking a bit more of a leadership role in advocacy as well, and thought leadership through UN meetings, promoting professional upskilling and professional development in the UN system at large, but also through governments and corporates, but also from K-12 through to universities. So that's who we are. The latest 2 courses are popular. The Living Amazon, this was a report by the Science Panel on the Amazon, and its recommendations were put into a course. And I think it blends science policy practice very nicely. But instead of doing the production on site in the Amazon itself, we actually got a lot of footage from communities and drones that were able to kind of create a nice kind of documentary style kind of science panel or discussion and policy discussion. But I think it's a very popular course. And then over the summer, we did do a course on revitalizing multilateralism for a sustainable future. In other words, training everyone up for the Pact for the Future, which obviously was signed by consensus, unfortunately, not unanimously. And we are still developing that course to build us up to the World Social Summit, which is all about getting individuals, no matter where they operate in academia, corporates, or governments, to sign up to a social contract where we respect people and planet, not just in our own country, but all over the world. So that's going to be a nice World Social Summit, the last, if you like, installment of our Common Agenda 21 to 25. I run this master's course, which has a cert and a micro-credential, a diploma, and it's all online and it's relatively cheap. So you might want to have a look at this, and it's done with SDSN. And we are partnering with Dar es Salaam and University West Indies and Chinese University Hong Kong, etc., to working together for cheaper professional upskilling of folks on sustainable development. Just some comments. The Secretary General brought in the Common Agenda 21, and this was about turbocharging progress towards the SDGs. And unfortunately, what was ahead of him and the UN, not only was the defunding of the UN by the Trump era, but also with COVID and now with the geopolitical situations. So when we did the midpoint review of the SDGs, we saw that we were making relatively little progress. In fact, only progress on 10% of the targets. And in some ways, if we keep going like this, it is possible that by 2015, that all of the targets will be in a worse position than they were in 2015 by 2030. But at the same time, the Common Agenda was supposed to turbocharge it by focusing on things like education, but we had the Transforming Education Summit. Then we had obviously Pact for the Future, which is focusing on financing and governance issues and so on. And now we have the World's Social Contract. So the idea was to get MOIs or enablers to turbocharge progress towards the SDGs by 2030. And the interesting point that came out of Pact for the Future in Chapter 1 was the High-Level Political Forum, which is the body that reviews the SDGs, both for governments and broader stakeholders, will be the body responsible for looking at what comes post-2030. And I can't imagine a body that's about the SDGs would want to get rid of the SDGs, so that's good news. And the second thing is that it's not going to start till when the HLPF is under the General Assembly again, which is in 2027, which is kind of quite late. So I'm assuming the SDGs will go on to 2050, but they will be augmented by maybe digital issues, digital transformation, for example, and other issues that might augment it. But I think out of respect to all the education and planning of governments and corporates and universities around the SDGs, it would not be appropriate to have a new agenda after 2030. The thing about the Common Agenda, it highlights these dystopian threats, and we're going to hear one about water and the environment in general, social inequalities within between countries, vulnerability to famine, conflict, and then geopolitical issues. Unfortunately, all of these are getting worse and not better. But that's why the only sort of plan we have in designing the future we want are the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, the Montreal Biodiversity Framework, and I'm going to add in the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants, which should have been really in the documents, in the SDG document initially. There are talks about making these a bit more coherent and timelines. So Paris is more about these nationally determined commitments that will be made, say in COP29, which is within country. But we all know that most of climate change issues are actually across country in terms of import and export of energy, in terms of transportation, in terms of global supply chains. And unfortunately, a multilateral approach has to become, so achieving the SDGs really is going to be very much part of achieving our climate targets. So I think all of these frameworks, which is happening in European legislation, will have to be somehow made coherent and integrated with similar timelines and get synergies from them. Just coming out of the Pact for the Future, if you want to have a look at it, these were the big enablers, finance for sustainable development. Like obviously $20 trillion at this stage on military and security. If we could actually spend that money on peace and sustainable development, we would be a much better world. We do need to reform the Security Council and the UN system at large, to fight for, if you like, peace and security. Technology, the digital transformation is here. There's a digital global compact, which is very interesting, and it's very good for. I just want digital assets to be used and owned by the public and created by the public, so that we can have, let's say, digital twins of oceans to manage ocean health, rather than promoting some sort of security issues or military issues. Of course, this is all about the future generations, leaving the world behind in a good condition as we find it, in terms of water resources and everything. And of course, multilateralism is weak, and we have to work on how we coordinate things across nations. The two instruments I point out to, which the Green Institute does, is training and education. And even though Pact for the Future didn't say much about this, in the midpoint review and the political declaration, where all countries again signed up and recommitted to these agreements, that was co-facilitated by Qatar and Ireland in 2023, there's a very good statement on education in terms of preschool, K-12 to higher levels, vocational levels, lifelong learning, gender issues, and so on and so forth. So I think we do have a mandate to keep going on upskilling and reskilling. So what I want to leave you with, though, is, I know at the end of the day, climate action and climate adaptation, you could drive it down to individual responsibility. And that is fair enough, in the sense that all of us are in households, we're in companies, we're in government in some way or form, like either in the bureaucratic side of government, or we elect people into the legislature, or, so we're all part of political systems, social and economic systems, and we should take actions that care for people and planet, and obviously try to mitigate and adapt to greenhouse gas emissions. But the reality is the world at the moment, when you look at a $20 trillion economy, most of that is explained by groupings around global supply chains. And these global supply chains are very, where you might have the dominance of 3 or 4 top companies in terms of multinationals at the lead of these supply chains. They are responsible for a lot of the transportation and the energy movement, and also what's happening in goods and services in terms of their, say, water footprints and carbon footprints, etc. So I just want to show you a little initiative that UNIDO and UNITAR and SDSN are doing, because there was a conference last week in Riyadh, and it was what's called the Second Multilateral Industrial Policy Forum. And it's all about coordinating governments to have industrial policies to try and make these global supply chains inclusive and sustainable. But the problem is, we want a conversation with corporates and academics and all stakeholders. And we also want a bit of training and upskilling on this, because it's not very obvious. So what I'm going to do is just show you a promo of an initiative that we're going to be starting. And it was actually launched in Riyadh just last week, but it just gives you a sense of the seriousness maybe of a global approach to these things, and highlighting the sort of problems we have when it comes to bottom-up initiatives, when actually the world kind of needs these. So I'm going to play this, and then I'm going to move on to the keynote. So thanks for your patience.
The world is undergoing significant transformations. Global value chains are being reshaped, driven by renewable energy, digital and demographic transitions, global rebalancing, and new regulations in different countries or regions. Real economy needs to restructure. Financing solutions need to incentivize these shifts. Market forces cannot do this alone. Policies and regulations have to support these transformations, give a sense of direction, and create incentives for private sector innovations. However, if each country starts doing it on its own, regulatory and policy misalignment will stifle progress. As economies transition, there will be trade-offs and costs in the short run. Countries will tend to compete for offering easy solutions and shifting negative effects outside of their jurisdictions. Another race to the bottom and negative consequences for countries with less capacities must be avoided. To this end, UNIDO called for new era industrial policies to achieve the SDGs. A major gap in capacities must be addressed. For policymakers, to design and coordinate industrial policies for greener and more inclusive transitions. For business, to develop new business strategies and models. For vocational education, to provide relevant learning for sustainable jobs. For academia, to offer quicker, flexible and action-oriented learning pathways. There is expertise spread across multiple networks, actors and countries. We must connect the dots across different partners and regions. Some relevant learning is already available, but the offer is fragmented. We need a more strategic approach to capacity building. Capabilities for the Future Hub will help connect the dots, partners and countries within and across regions. The aim is to enable all to pool their expertise and fast-track progress, in particular for those with less resources. We should start with policymakers to ensure SDG-aligned industrial and regulatory policy. The efforts across the private sector and education should align. Foundational learning should be built out with industry-specific offers with variations for regions. This could only emerge out of collaborations. The Hub will contribute to cohesive national industrial policies, learning strategies, and multilateral coordination. For the Hub to go live, we need UN member states' mandates and voluntary contributions, and more business and education players with knowledge, learning resources and funding for this global public good. Join us.
Okay, so that's just pointing out that when it comes to things like the Amazon or global supply chains in the economy or in the global economy, that unfortunately, I think we're going to have to do a lot more interstate or coordination across member states. And of course, the idea here is the lawyers and the insurance companies and logistic companies that look after these global supply chains have to work with the policymakers and academics to actually transform these into sustainable and inclusive value chains. Which they're not at the moment because they're at the epicenter of actually doing quite the opposite in terms of maybe exploiting societal inequalities or exploiting environmental resources as a source and a sink. So that's just to give you a sense of kind of more top-down or intergovernmental approaches to climate change and adaptation. But at the end of the day, it just feeds down into the more national, obviously, and community and individual approaches. So I'm going to stop there.